Hello, Rocky Ridge 4th graders. This is Mr. Johnson, and we are going to read Chapter 6 in Lunch Money. Sour Business. Sometimes a disagreement between two kids stays that way, just between the kids themselves. But the clash between Greg and Maura had always been right out in the open, and it had deep historical roots. Their wrangling had been noticed by their parents, by their neighbors, by all their friends, and especially by every teacher who had ever had them in the same classroom. Greg and Maura squabbled like cats and dogs all day long, always trying to outdo each other. My classroom's not big enough with those two around. That's how their first grade teacher, Mrs. Gibson, had described the situation. Maura and Greg are both so headstrong. They have a definite personality conflict. That was their fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Haversock, had to say about it. They're like positive and negative numbers, always trying to cancel each other out. That's how Mr. Xenopoulos tried to explain it. Now that Greg and Maura were both in the sixth grade, he was their math teacher. And as Greg himself stood there outside the music room on Thursday afternoon holding an Ensty Bensty book, his long, thin face drawn into a fierce scowl. How did he describe his problem with Maura? I hate her guts. Strong words. It had an expression Greg had picked up from watching in old gangster movies. And it had also a stupid expression, because if Maura Shaw's guts had been walking down the hall, Greg wouldn't recognize them. The truth is, all guts are pretty much alike. But Greg was not thinking logically that moment. And saying that he hated Maura's guts did not feel like too strong of a statement. If anything, it wasn't strong enough, because as far as Greg was concerned, Maura was no better than the common thief. She had always been a copycat, which would have been enough. But Greg couldn't stand it when she tried to weasel in on his money-making ideas. Maura had been a bother for years, and now this. Greg stuffed Maura's book into his pocket. Just as the bell rang, he ducked into the music room and sat down. Mrs. Chalmers immediately began playing scales on the piano, and the class began singing warm-up exercises. Greg had his mouth open, and his voice went, "Oh-ee, oh-ee, oh-ee, oh," along with the others. But Greg's mind was elsewhere. He had big plans for Chunky Comics, huge plans, and Maura was going to try to sell her stupid Ensty Bensty books at school and try to steal his customers. Maura was going to eat into his profits, may even mess up everything. Something had to change. Maura, to be exact, and she had to change right away, like today. Greg had been stiffed through his past experiences with Maura. One particular incident jumped to mind. It did not give him much reason for hope. Greg's first business outside his own home was a lemonade stand. He had sold his first cup of lemonade at the end of June during the summer after second grade, and he stuck with it every hot, sunny day all during July and August. The next summer, he sold lemonade again. And when his customers came back the second summer, he started using the honor system. People served themselves and just dropped quarters through the slot in the lid of the glass jar. That left Greg free to make money doing something like mowing a lawn at the same time. It was a really hot day during the summer. After fourth grade, he set up shop once more. His new sign announced, "Greg's Ice Cold Lemonade, still 25 cents. Less than an hour later, the trouble began, because there was Maura Shaw right across the street setting up her own lemonade stand under a bright beach umbrella with the big sign, "Maura's Tasty Lemonade, only 20 cents. All afternoon, Greg had watched helplessly. About half of his customers stopped and bought lemonade from Maura. 2 days later, on Saturday, it got hot again, and by noon there was Mora sitting on her umbrella selling bargain lemonade. However, Greg had been thinking. He loaded an ice bucket and 2 jugs of lemonade into a red wagon. Then he began pulling the wagon around the neighborhood, delivering cold cups of lemonade right to the sweaty hands of the people who were outside mowing and trimming and working on their gardens. Direct delivery was a great idea, and some bought 2 or 3 refills. Greg was making good money. But 20 minutes later, there was Mora on the other side of the street pulling a wagon, selling her lemonade in exactly the same way. Greg had gotten furious. He looked both ways, and then he marched across Maple Avenue, planting himself in front of Mora on the sidewalk. She pushed a few strands of damp yellow hair off her forehead. She looked Greg right in the eye and said, "You're in my way." Greg shook his head. "No, you're in my way. You're the one who's stealing my customers and my ideas." Mora didn't blink. "I can sell lemonade if I want to. Anybody can. Like my mother. She sold lemonade when she was little. She told me so. And I can pull my wagon anywhere I want to." Then Mora had taken a step closer and put her freckled nose down 3 inches from Greg's. Her eyes were big and blue, absolutely fearless. "So get out of my way." Mora probably outweighed him by 15 pounds back then. Greg hadn't wanted to have a shouting match, so he moved off the sidewalk. But as her wagon went by, he had kicked the back wheel and said, "Why don't you try coming up with an idea of your own?" Mora said, "Maybe I will," and stuck out her tongue. "Yeah," said Greg, "except you don't even have a brain. I do too, so prove it," said Greg. "Maybe I will," Mora said again. And Greg said, "I doubt it, brainless." For about a week after that, Mora didn't show up on the lemonade trail. Greg had thought, "I guess I told her." The weather stayed hot, and Greg had been making $2, sometimes $3, $4 a day. Then one afternoon, he spotted Mora. From door to door around the neighborhood, she was wearing a yellow dress, white socks, and little black shoes. She was carrying something in a wooden picnic basket. Greg couldn't tell what Mora was selling, but he could tell that the money was changing hands. He had watched her for about 10 minutes, dying to know what she was up to. Finally, he couldn't stand it. Greg slipped out of his side door and ran across the backyard, trotted down the alley, tiptoed between 2 houses, and hid in the bushes next to the Jansen's front porch. He had to wait almost 10 minutes, crouching in that scratchy hemlock branches, swatting at mosquitoes. Then Mora had come across the street and walked to the Jansen's front steps. Her feet on the wooden porch sounded like a brass drum. Greg heard the bell. Then little footsteps came running. Someone bumped into the storm door. Mora said, "Hi, Timmy. Is your mommy home?" Timmy Jansen was about 3. After a long pause, he said, "She's my mommy," Mora said. "Uh-huh. Can you call your mommy for me?" She paused. Timmy said, "She's my mommy." Mora laughed and said, "I know. So just turn around and shout, 'Mommy, someone's at the door.' You can do that, right? So call her. Go on, call her. Your mommy is home, isn't she?" After a long pause, she said, "Mommy." Mora gave up. Then she called through the screen, "Mrs. Jansen, it's me, Mora Shaw. Is anyone home?" Greg had heard bigger footsteps, and then, "Oh, hello, Mora. Don't you look pretty today? It's not Girl Scout cookie time, is it?" "No, I'm selling pot holders. I made them myself." Over in the bushes, Greg had almost burst out laughing. "Pot holders? That is so dumb." Mrs. Jansen thought otherwise. "They were beautiful, Mora, so colorful. And you say they made them all by himself?" "Uh-huh. Well, I want these 2 for myself And these blue and pink ones will go perfectly with my sister's kitchen. How much are you charging? $2 each. Oh, a bargain. I'm going to buy an extra pair for myself. Greg heard Mrs. Jansen walk away, come back and open the storm door, and then Greg heard his favorite sound in the whole world. Excuse me. In the whole world. The whisper of crisp bills as the money was counted out. Except the bills were being counted into Maura's open hand. Here's 5 and 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Would you mind making 4 quarters? Would you mind taking 4 quarters? Not at all. Greg heard the coins, and then Mrs. Jansen had said, well, that makes $12. Maura said, thank you. And thank you, Maura. We think of you all the time when we use these pot holders in the kitchen. Won't we, Timmy? And Timmy said, she's my mommy. Greg had heard enough. He slipped out of the bushes, scooted between the houses, and ran home. It was hot, so he gone to the refrigerator to pour himself a glass of leftover lemonade. It tasted sour. Greg remembered grabbing a pencil and a memo pad so he could do some calculating. If Maura had gone around to the neighborhood, and if every mom who was home had bought a couple of pot holders, then she might have made as much as $50 in one afternoon. $50 was serious money. Then the doorbell had rung, and his mom had called from the basement. Greg, would you see who's at the door? It was Maura. She was smiling at Greg and saying, hello, little boy. Is your mommy at home? Greg glared at her. Then she grinned and said, Mom, she's my mommy. Oh, then he grinned and said, she's my mommy. Maura's blue eyes had gotten wide and then narrowed. She pointed an accusing finger and said, you were spying on me over the Jensens, weren't you? Greg's grin got bigger, and then he said, she's my mommy. Then whomp, he slammed the door in Maura's face. It felt so good. The bell rang again, and then he opened the door for a second time. Greg called over the shoulder, Mom, there's something at the door for you. Greg's mom had rustled into the front hallway. Maura, I was hoping you'd be coming, Mrs. Altman said, as Mrs. Altman called, and said you were walking around selling the prettiest pot holders. I hope you have some nice ones left for me. Greg had gone up about 4 steps on the front stair hallway and leaned against the banister so he could overlook his mom's shoulder. There was a yellow cloth covering the bottom of the basket, and the pot holders were arranged so they looked like diamonds instead of squares. These are so lovely, Maura. How much do they cost? Maura had hesitated half a second, and then she said, $3. 3, Greg said. I thought they were $2 each. But Maura had held her ground. I've only got 4 left, and these are my best ones. These are $3 each. Greg had known exactly what Maura was doing. She was raising her price, trying to discover the most a customer would actually pay. It was a smart thing to do, something Greg had done himself. Not sure enough. His mom said, I only have only $3 for these beautiful handmade holders. I'll take all 4 of them. And she went and gone to get her purse. Maura had known she had just won a battle. She looked up at Greg, giving him a big smile, and said, still think you don't have a brain? I just made $12, another $12, right here at your house. Say, I'm thirsty. She pulled out a quarter from her pocket in her dress and held it out to him. Could you get me a cup of lemonade? Greg curled his lip and said, I wouldn't give it to you. But just then his mom came back. He hadn't finished the sentence. He turned around and stomped upstairs, then down the hallway to his bedroom and slammed the door. Sitting there in the music room, more than a year after the lemonade battles, Greg still remembered what had happened next. He had walked over to his bedroom and watched Maura walk across Maple Street to her front door, swinging her empty basket as she pushed another $12 into her dress pocket. And he remembered thinking that making those pot holders and selling to moms had been a smart idea. and getting dressed up. And putting a nice cloth on the bottom of the basket, also smart. Greg remembered that he had to admit that the girl he called brainless was actually a good thinker. Mora did have a brain, and not backing down when he caught her charging $3 per pot holder instead of $2. Then that had taken some guts. And remember that Mora had guts, reminding Greg how much he hated them. Mora was a tough competitor, and in another 35 minutes, he'd see her because they were both in level 4 math. It was time for a showdown. Ooh, what do we think's going to happen? Rocky Ridge, 4th graders. Greg seems pretty mad. Mora seems like she's winning right now, this little battle. So put in the comments what you think is going to happen in Chapter 7, and we will find out next time. Thank you very much. Have a good day.